Hello and welcome back to Dear Jordan. Today's letter is about something that took me many years to understand and even longer to fully accept. It's about questioning, not rebellion for the sake of rebellion, but the quiet courage it takes to ask why. When I was growing up, obedience was simple. If someone older than me told me to sit somewhere, I sat. If someone told me to stay still, I stayed still. I didn't ask questions because I trusted that the people giving the instructions had my best interest in mind. But life has a way of complicating things. At some point along the way, trust can get broken. And when that happens, something changes inside the mind. You start looking at the world a little differently. You start asking questions you never thought to ask before. You start wondering about people's intentions, about the reasons behind the things they say, and the things they expect from you. For me, that questioning expanded into everything: teachers, bosses, leadership, systems, even my understanding of God. And while some people think questioning faith is a sign of weakness, I've come to believe the opposite is true. The Bible itself is filled with people who ask God hard questions. Job questioned suffering. David cried out in confusion. Even the prophets wrestled with what they saw happening in the world. Questioning isn't the enemy of faith. Sometimes it's the path that leads you deeper into it. But there's another side to the story that I want to talk about today, because even after learning how important it was to question things, there was a time in my life when I stopped. And stopping came with consequences I didn't fully understand until much later. So today's letter is about the difference between obedience and complacency, about what happens when questions are met with fear instead of conversation, and why learning to trust your instincts may be one of the most important forms of wisdom you will ever develop. So grab yourself a cup of coffee and let's listen in. Dear Jordan, most of my growth in life came during the seasons when I chose not to listen to the people around me. That may sound rebellious at first, but the truth is that I didn't begin life that way. I was actually a very obedient child. If my mother told me to sit somewhere, I sat there. If she said stay still, I stayed still. I didn't question it. I didn't ask why. I simply trusted the instruction. Back then, I didn't need explanations because trust already existed. Obedience is easy when trust is intact. But something interesting happens in the human mind when trust is broken. Psychologists often talk about how betrayal shifts the way we process authority. Once the foundation of trust cracks, the brain naturally begins searching for patterns, motives, and intentions. It is a way of protecting itself from being misled again. And that is exactly what happened to me. Once that trust was broken, I began to question everything. At first, it wasn't dramatic. It started quietly. I wanted to understand people's intentions. I wanted to know why someone was asking something of me. I wanted to understand what the outcome would be if I did exactly what I was being told to do. So my questions expanded. I questioned teachers. I questioned bosses. I questioned systems. I questioned any form of leadership that expected obedience without explanation. And eventually, Jordan, I started questioning God. In some circles, that sounds almost blasphemous. But the God I came to know through Scripture is not threatened by honest questions. In fact, the Bible is full of people who wrestled with him openly. Job asked why suffering was allowed. David cried out in the Psalms, "How long, O Lord?" Even the prophet Habakkuk questioned the justice of what he saw happening around him. Questioning was never the problem. Pride was. The difference is posture. When I question God, I try to do it humbly. I understand that I'm finite and He is not. I know that my understanding is limited while His is eternal. Sometimes I still want to know. Sometimes I still ask why. And the truth is, the answers come in different ways. Sometimes I receive an answer quickly. Sometimes the answer takes time, and sometimes I'm still waiting. Waiting, as it turns out, is one of the most common classrooms of faith. But what I want you to understand, Jordan, is this. You are not wrong to question things. You are not wrong to seek understanding, purpose, and truth. Because questioning often leads to growth. It forces us to examine what we believe and why we believe it. It helps us separate wisdom from mere instruction. Blind obedience, on the other hand, can keep a person stuck in the same place for a very long time. And sometimes it isn't even a place they chose. It is simply the place they complied with. And compliance without understanding eventually turns into complacency. And complacency is no way to live. And yet, Jordan, even after learning the importance of questioning things, there was a time in my life when I stopped. Not because I suddenly believed everything was right, and not because my instincts had gone quiet, but because somewhere along the way I had been conditioned to believe that keeping the peace was more important than asking the hard questions. Psychology calls this conditioning. When someone is repeatedly taught that conflict leads to consequences, the brain begins to choose safety over truth. It becomes easier to remain silent than to risk what might happen if you speak up. So I did something that, looking back now, feels strange considering how much I questioned the world around me. I complied. Little by little, I stopped examining things. I stopped asking why certain behaviors existed. I stopped pushing back against things that didn't sit right in my spirit. Instead, I told myself that patience was virtue and endurance was strength. And the Bible does speak about patience and endurance, but what it never teaches is the acceptance of harm. Scripture calls us to wisdom just as much as it calls us to peace. In Matthew chapter 10, verse 16, Jesus tells his followers to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. Wisdom requires awareness. It requires discernment. It requires asking questions when something feels wrong. But when you are conditioned to believe that questioning authority, questioning behavior, or questioning the environment around you is somehow disloyal or disrespectful, something subtle begins to happen. You become complacent, not because you're weak, not because you are naive, but because the path of least resistance feels safer than the path of confrontation. And complacency has a way of trapping people in situations far longer than they ever intended to stay. Looking back now, I can see that if I had asked questions earlier, if I had trusted the instincts that were quietly trying to get my attention, the road out might have been much shorter. But growth has a strange way of coming through the very experiences we wish we had avoided. And that is something I want you to understand too, Jordan. Questioning is not rebellion. Sometimes questioning is the very thing that protects your life. There is another truth I want you to understand because it took me a long time to realize it. If your questions are met with violence, that is not your fault. When you are inside a harmful situation, the mind tries to make sense of what just happened. Your first instinct is often to turn the blame inward. You start wondering if maybe you shouldn't have asked that question. Maybe you said it the wrong way. Maybe you pushed too far. The human brain is wired to search for control in moments of chaos. Psychologists call this cognitive reframing. If we convince ourselves that we caused the reaction, then we believe we can prevent it next time by behaving differently. But the truth is much simpler than that. Healthy people are not threatened by questions. When someone is acting in good faith, your questions are met with conversation. They may explain themselves, they may disagree with you, they may even become frustrated, but they do not respond with intimidation or violence. Violence appears when truth threatens something that someone else is trying to hide. In those moments, the danger is not the question. The danger is the wrongdoing that the question exposes. Proverbs 17, verse 27 says that the one who has knowledge uses words with restraint. Wisdom knows how to answer. It does not need force to defend itself. So if questioning leads to violence, the responsibility does not belong to the one seeking understanding. It belongs to the one who cannot tolerate the truth. And that realization leads to another difficult truth about situations like these. There is no perfect path out. People often talk about leaving harmful situations as though there is a clean and obvious exit. They imagine that one day you simply decide to walk away and the story ends there. But real life is rarely that simple. Every situation carries its own set of consequences, its own risks, and its own people who may be affected by the decision you make. Children may be involved. Families may be intertwined. The person causing harm may be unpredictable. This is where discernment becomes essential. Discernment is different from knowledge. Knowledge gathers information, but discernment helps you understand how that information should guide your next step. The Bible speaks about discernment often. In Proverbs 3, verse 21, it says, "My son, do not let wisdom and understanding out of your sight." Wisdom teaches us what is right. Discernment teaches us how to navigate the complicated path toward what is right. And sometimes that path is not straightforward. Sometimes leaving requires strategy. Sometimes it requires patience. Sometimes it requires waiting until the moment when the risk becomes survivable. Because in situations where harm exists, the stakes can become very real. Sometimes it becomes a matter of life and death. And when life is on the line, the goal is always to choose life. Not just your own life, but the preservation of life itself. Because the consequences of death ripple far beyond the moment. They touch families, futures, and generations in ways that can never be undone. So the decisions made in those moments require more than courage. They require wisdom, restraint, and careful discernment about the person you are dealing with and the impact your actions will have. It is survival. And sometimes survival is the bravest decision a person can make. So what does this mean for you, Jordan? It means that paying attention early matters. Most harmful situations do not begin with obvious danger. They begin with small moments that feel slightly off, a comment that makes you uncomfortable, a reaction that feels too intense for the situation, a moment where someone becomes angry simply because you asked a reasonable question. Those moments are easy to dismiss when they first appear. Psychologists often talk about something called cognitive dissonance. That is the tension we feel when someone's behavior doesn't match the image we have of them. Instead of adjusting our understanding of the person, we sometimes adjust our interpretation of the behavior. We explain it away. We minimize it. We tell ourselves it was just a bad day. But patterns always reveal the truth eventually. That is why discernment is so important. Discernment is the ability to observe behavior over time and allow the pattern to tell you who someone really is. It requires patience. It requires honesty with yourself. And sometimes it requires accepting an answer you wish were different. The Bible speaks directly to this kind of wisdom. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 16, Jesus says, "You will know them by their fruits, not by their words, not by their promises, but by the pattern of their decisions." If someone consistently responds to questions with respect, patience, and honesty, that fruit is worth trusting. But if someone responds to your questions with anger, intimidation, or attempts to silence you, that is fruit worth paying attention to as well. Because the way someone responds when they are challenged tells you far more about their character than the way they behave when everything is going their way. And here is something I want you to carry with you for the rest of your life. You are allowed to ask questions in any relationship. You are allowed to seek understanding. You are allowed to expect respect in the way someone answers you. Healthy relationships are not threatened by curiosity. They are strengthened by it. Two people who care about each other should be able to talk openly, disagree respectfully, and seek clarity without fear. That is what safety looks like. Safety is not silence. Safety is not compliance. Safety is the freedom to speak without fear of harm. And if you ever find yourself in a situation where asking a simple question feels dangerous, that feeling deserves your full attention. because sometimes the quiet voice inside you is not fear. Sometimes it is wisdom trying to protect you. And learning to listen to that voice may be one of the most important forms of discernment you will ever develop. And maybe the most important thing I want you to understand, Jordan, is this: you are allowed to question me. You can ask me anything. You can challenge something I say. You can come to me and tell me that something I did or something I believe doesn't make sense to you. You are allowed to want answers. I may not always have them. There will be times when you ask me something and I will have to say, I don't know. There will be times when I may give you the best answer I can and later realize I was wrong. Being your mother doesn't make me perfect. It just means I am the person who is responsible for trying my best to guide you. But there is one thing I can promise you with complete certainty. I will always be safe for your questions. You will never have to fear asking me something. You will never have to walk on eggshells around your curiosity. You will never have to calculate whether a simple question will cause anger or harm, because the people who truly love you will never punish you for wanting understanding. James chapter 1 verse 5 says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives generously to all without finding fault." God himself invites questions. He does not shame us for seeking understanding. He does not punish us for wanting clarity. He welcomes the conversation. And if the God of the universe is not threatened by our questions, then the people who love you should not be either. So ask your questions. Ask them of the world. Ask them of the people around you. Ask them of the systems you find yourself inside of. And ask them of me. Because questioning is not rebellion. Sometimes questioning is simply the soul reaching for truth. And if there is one thing I want you to know as you grow into the woman you will become, it is this: you never have to be silent in order to be loved, not by the right people, and never by me. With all the love I am still learning how to give, your mom. Thank you for listening to Dear Jordan. If today's letter resonated with you, I hope it reminds you that seeking understanding is never something to be ashamed of. Growth begins the moment we allow ourselves to ask the questions we've been afraid to ask. If you'd like to continue these conversations with me, you can follow Dear Jordan here on Spotify so you never miss a new letter. And if you're someone navigating difficult relationships, healing from past experiences, or learning how to rebuild your voice after seasons of silence, I also offer coaching for those who are walking through those journeys. You can find the link to connect with me in the description of this episode. Until next time, this has been Dear Jordan, Letters to My Daughter.